It's late on a Saturday afternoon and the air feels different. That kind of cool that sneaks in under the garage door, carrying a little bit of pine and distant chimney smoke with it. The heater's humming, a cup of coffee just sits out of reach, already lukewarm, but I don't mind. The radio's low, half holiday music, half static, and there's a small pile of cedar scraps on the workbench waiting to become something. Nothing fancy, just a little desktop planner I've been wanting to make for a friend at work. She mentioned wanting something to brighten up her office window, and I thought, yeah, I can do that. A few cuts, some glue, a little sanding, and by Sunday afternoon she'll have something simple but special. That's what I love about weekends like this. The projects don't have to be big or complicated. You don't need a stack of plans or a shop full of tools, just a small spark of an idea and a couple of quiet hours to make it happen. And while I'm waiting for the glue to dry, I find myself thinking, not about the project, but about her reaction. How it'll feel to hand it over. That small pause when someone realizes you made this. That's the kind of magic I think we forget about this time of year. It's not about the grand gestures. It's about the small, thoughtful things that feel like home. Today we're talking about simple weekend projects that don't take a ton of time but mean a whole lot more than they look. Welcome back to the Maker's Table Holiday Special Series, part of the Third Shift Crafts podcast. Last week we talked about why handmade still matters, the heart behind what we build, pour, and gather. This week we're getting a little closer to the bench, because sometimes the best reminder of what handmade means isn't found in a big project or a long build, it's found in the small ones. You know, I used to think woodworking had to be grand to count, tables, cutting boards, full builds with clamps lined up like soldiers, but some of my favorite projects were the smallest, like that little desktop planner I mentioned a minute ago. It started as an afterthought, a few scraps from another build, a free hour on a Saturday. I wasn't chasing perfection. I just wanted to make something quick that felt like me. And by Sunday afternoon, there it was. This little cedar box with clean lines and a soft finish, simple but full of intention. When I handed it to my friend that Monday, she ran her fingers along the grain and smiled like it was something far more important than what it was. That's the thing about making for others. People can feel the care, even in the simplest pieces. And that's what today's episode is all about. Simple weekend builds that don't take much time but mean the world to the person who gets them. Because the truth is, most of us don't have endless hours this time of year. We've got errands, gathering, kids' schedules, and that one strand of lights that never works right no matter how early you start. So when we do carve out time to build, it has to fit into the rhythm of real life. That's the beauty of weekend woodworking. It teaches you to scale the project to the moment, to look at what's on hand, work with what you've got, and still end up with something beautiful. I think that's why these kinds of projects hold so much meaning. They're approachable, manageable. You start Saturday morning with a pile of scraps, and by Sunday night, you've created something that will live in someone else's space. A small reminder that they were thought of, that time was spent for them. And really, that's what craftsmanship looks like in its purest form. Not big, not complicated, just intentional. So whether you've got a full shop or just a corner of the garage, this episode is your reminder that you can still make something worthwhile this season. Something that feels like home. Because sometimes the best projects aren't the ones that challenge your skills. They're the ones that restore your heart. One of my favorite things about woodworking is how forgiving it can be. You don't always need a full plan or a weekend map down to the minute. Sometimes you just need a free afternoon, a few offcuts, and a reason to make something that'll bring a little warmth into someone else's space. So let's talk about a few simple projects you can finish before Monday morning. Pieces that don't take much time but still carry the I made this for you feeling. Tea light holders. This is one of those projects that proves scrap wood has a second life. A few short pieces of pine, cedar, or whatever you've got lying around, drilled with a Forstner bit to fit small candles, and suddenly you've created something beautiful out of leftovers. You can batch them out fast, cut, sand, maybe add a little oil or finish to bring out the grain. They're perfect for gift baskets or holiday tables, and each one ends up looking just a little different, like handmade snowflakes that actually smell like tung oil instead of pine. But what I love most about them is how small they are. They remind you that handmade doesn't have to be heavy or complicated. Sometimes a tiny glow is just enough. A rustic serving board. If you've got a piece of hardwood you've been saving, a wide board with character or a live edge that's too pretty to toss, turn it into a serving board. It's just sanding, softening the edges, maybe cutting in a small handle or adding a little beeswax for finish. I like to gift these with a small wedge of cheese or a jar of jam tied to the top. It feels personal, thoughtful, and usable, something people will reach for all year long. And the best part? You don't need a ton of time or precision. just patience and a willingness to let the wood show off its natural charm. Every scratch, every swirl on the grain becomes part of the story. When someone pulls it out months later and says, "Lauren made this," that's the real finished coat right there. A mini wall shelf or rack. This one's for anyone who loves decor that doubles as function. A few narrow boards, a couple screws or dowels, and you've got a place for mugs, candles, or small plants. It's one of those you can make it in an hour projects that look way more impressive than the effort it takes. If you got reclaimed wood or something with a little history, even better. That mix of old and new gives the piece soul. And it's the perfect kind of gift for someone who loves homey touches but doesn't have time to DIY themselves. Now, these aren't the kind of builds that'll land you on the cover of a woodworking magazine, but that's exactly why they matter. They're approachable, quick, joyful. They remind you that the act of creating, of shaping, sanding, finishing, is enough all on its own. Because at the end of the day, it's not about perfection, it's about presence. The sound of the sander, the smell of the sawdust, the feeling of finishing something with your own hands, and that quiet pride that sneaks up when you step back, look at what you made, and think, yeah, that's mine. These are the kind of projects that fill a weekend, sure, but they also fill something deeper. They bring you back to why you started making it in the first place, to build, to share, and to bring a little light into someone else's world. The thing about these little weekend projects is that they do something bigger than we realize. They give our hands something to do, but they also give our minds somewhere to rest. There's the kind of rhythm that happens when you're sanding or brushing on finish. You start out thinking about all the other things you should be doing, errands, emails, laundry, and somewhere between the second coat of oil and the third pass with 220 grit, your brain finally quiets down. It's like the noise of life fades out and you start to remember what peace actually feels like. That's the part of woodworking I don't think gets talked about enough, the therapy of it. How repetitive, simple motions can slow your breathing and reset your focus. You don't even have to be trying, it just happens. And by the time you put the project down, you're calmer than when you started. It's funny, I used to think creativity had to look inspired, like you had to feel some big burst of motivation before you could build or make anything worth doing. But over the years, I've learned it's the opposite, that stillness comes through the work, not before it. Sometimes picking up a piece of scrap wood and just starting, even without a plan, is all it takes to shift your whole day. You sand a little, cut a little, glue, clamp, repeat, and slowly that internal tension starts to fall away. You're not scrolling, not multitasking, not chasing productivity, you're just present. That's what small projects do for me. They don't overwhelm me with options or pressure. They give me a simple start and a quick finish. Enough to remind myself that I can still make something with my own two hands even in the middle of a busy season. I think that's why I always tell people not to underestimate easy projects. Because there's no such thing as easy when your heart is in it. Whether it's a tea light holder or a big dining table, you're still showing up. You're still creating something that didn't exist a few hours ago. And that's powerful, especially in a season that's constantly pulling our attention in 100 different directions. When you make something simple, it gives you permission to breathe, to step back and say, this was enough for today. You don't need a long to-do list to feel accomplished. You just need one small act of creation that brings you back to center. So if you find yourself this weekend with a few quiet hours, even just one, use them. Pull out the scraps, dust off the sander, make something tiny and meaningful. Because those small acts of making, those slow moments at the bench, they're the reset button we don't even know we need. The spirit of simple making isn't about what you build. It's about who you become while you're building it. There's a special kind of satisfaction that comes from finishing a project, but the best moment, at least for me, is what comes next. That quiet, meaningful pause when you hand it to someone else. You can tell a lot in that split second. Before they even say anything, there's usually a look, a mix of surprise and warmth, like they're trying to understand what it means that you just made this for them. And that's the beauty of giving something you built with your own hands. It carries a kind of honesty that words can't quite reach. Because whether it's a serving board, a tea light holder, or a small planter, you didn't just buy it. You spent time thinking about them while you made it. You picked the wood, chose the finish, made the cuts. Every step was intentional, personal. And the thing is, people can feel that. Even if they don't build or craft or cook, they recognize when something was made with care. There's energy in it, something human. I'll never forget one of the first gifts I gave like that. It wasn't fancy, just a small cutting board I'd made from leftover walnut and maple. But when the person opened it, they didn't talk about how it looked. They said, "You made this?" With this kind of disbelief that made me realize how rare it is these days for someone to be handed something truly handmade. That reaction has stayed with me because it reminded me that giving what we build is about more than the project. It's about the connection it creates. When we give something we've made, we're saying, I saw you, I thought of you, I gave you my time. And that's the most valuable thing we have to give. It's funny, we live in a world where everything can be shipped in 2 days. You can buy anything with a few taps on your phone, but what you can't buy is time. You can't buy the hours it took to sand a piece smooth or wait for the finish to dry. You can't replicate the quiet intention that happens when you build something just for one person. That's what makes handmade gifts so powerful. They stand out not because they're perfect, but because they're personal. And I think that's what the people in our lives really want this time of year. Not more stuff, but more connection. Something that feels real, thoughtful, grounded. So if you're on the fence about whether to make something this season, do it. Even if it's small, even if it's not perfect, even if the cuts don't line up or the stain comes out darker than you wanted. It's still a piece of you, shaped by your hands and your heart, and that's what people remember. Because long after the wrapping paper's gone, what lasts is the feeling behind the gift. The moment they unwrapped it, the smell of the wood, the sound of your voice when you said, yeah, I made that. And maybe that's the best gift we can give this season. Something simple, honest, and handmade. A reminder that thoughtfulness doesn't have to be loud to be meaningful. I think somewhere along the way, we started believing that the value of a gift comes from its price tag. How shiny it is, how big it is, how fast it ships. But if you've ever handed someone something you made with your own hands, you know that isn't true. There's a different kind of pride that comes from looking at something and knowing you shaped it from start to finish. No shortcuts, no instant gratification. Just you, a piece of wood, and a few hours spent turning an idea into something real. And maybe that's what I love most about weekend projects. They remind you that meaning doesn't have to take months to build. It just takes intention. You don't have to have a massive workshop. You don't have to be a professional. You just have to care enough to start. I think we underestimate how powerful small acts of creation can be. How sanding a board, drilling a hole, or wiping on finish can pull you out of your head and back into your body. How making something simple can help you slow down enough to actually enjoy the season you're in. Because when we build, even something tiny, we step outside the noise for a bit. We let our hands lead and our minds follow. We give ourselves permission to focus on one thing in one moment until it's done. And in that stillness, something inside us settles. That's the real reward of these weekend builds. Not the final product, but the quiet confidence that comes from creating something start to finish. The reminder that we can slow down, make something meaningful, and share it all in the space of a single weekend. So if you've been feeling stretched thin, or you're convinced there's no time left to be creative this season, here's your invitation. Find one small project. Something that fits on your bench and in your schedule. A tea light holder, a shelf, a serving board. Something that gives your hands something to do and your heart a reason to rest. Because it's never really about the project, it's about what it opens up inside of you. The peace, the patience, the sense of I made this. And maybe when you give that piece away, the person on the other end will feel that too. The quiet message tucked into every handmade thing. You matter. You were worth my time. That's what makes simple gifts feel like home. Thanks for joining me today at the Maker's Table. I hope this episode reminded you that it doesn't take a full shop or a week off work to make something meaningful. Sometimes all it takes is a Saturday afternoon, a few scraps of wood, and the decision to slow down long enough to create something that feels like home. If you do find yourself in the shop this weekend, whether you're making a candle holder, a cutting board, or something completely your own, I hope you notice how it feels. The calm, the focus, the quiet kind of joy that comes from shaping something with your hands. That's the good part. Next Saturday, we'll shift gears a bit for cooking slow when life feels fast. We'll talk about the rhythm of food, fire, and time, and why cooking might just be the most grounding craft of them all. Until then, keep building, keep making, and keep coming back to the work that roots you, because the best gifts and the best moments are always made by hand.